we should move on to your trip to Iran.
Yeah.
It was your first time there, and it comes at a time when the Trump administration and Iran are engaged in negotiations over a new nuclear deal. The Trump team seems to have not made up its mind. Steve Witkoff, just as he has with Gaza and Hamas, keeps going back and forth. First, he said that some enrichment is acceptable. Then, as soon as the neocon, pro-war, pro-Israel lobby freaked out, he reneged on that and said that actually Iran can't have any enrichment at all, which for Iran is a red line of its own, because they assert the right to peaceful enrichment. So you were just in Tehran. You were in other areas of the country. What were your impressions?
Well, and for anyone watching now, feel free to submit questions. Super chats might get more attention about my trip to Iran. I was looking for an opportunity to go to Iran. I have been for some time, and I thought this was actually the best time to go because of the possibility of conflict, but also because of the negotiations, which were, delaying or postponing the conflict that Trump had threatened. And I was invited to the Sob Film Festival, which had so many of our friends participating and people that we respect, former EU lawmakers like Mick Wallace, Claire Daly, George Galloway, Glenn Deason, the academic in Norway, was there. Propaganda and Company, Ahmed Sadruddin showed up. I went with my close collaborator, Anya Parampil. So it was great. Also great to travel with a woman, because it gives you kind of a more intimate understanding of women's issues in Iran, which I'll talk about in a second. So many of our fellow guests at Judge Napolitano were there, other than Judge. And so I thought, I want it to be, if I'm going to be doing panels, it should be with credible people I respect. And they were great. They were great panels for the 4 or 5 days that this festival took place. It was a film and broadcast festival that brought out like the whole of the Iranian broadcast industry, including people who make children's shows. There was an awards ceremony for like best animation, best article on this. But basically, outside of that, the festival took up a very small minority of my time. And I didn't have like a minder. I was able to get access, whether by requesting it from my hosts or just by going out. And I was never limited in anything I wanted to do. And by the end of the trip, just to answer your question quickly, I was able to get access to some diplomats, seasoned diplomats, who had very detailed inside knowledge of what was taking place through the negotiations. This was also partly because the Iranian Foreign Ministry was hosting something called Tehran Talks. And they brought out President Pezeshkian and Javad Zarif to engage with scores of diplomats and like think tankers from Washington and diplomats from around the world. So on the outskirts of that, I was able to speak to some people about what was actually taking place. And there was just this bewilderment among the negotiators about Team Trump and what their agenda was and why they seemed to be so confused and almost incompetent. Steve Witkoff was described as someone who is incredibly distracted. He had too much on his platter. He didn't understand the issues very well. And whenever they would seem to come to some kind of agreement or make momentum, this is all about the nuclear issue, Witkoff or someone else would go back to Washington and make deeply damaging statements, as Steve Witkoff did when he declared, I guess 2 Sundays ago on ABC's This Week, that the red line for the US is 0% enrichment for Iran. But this is not what they were saying in Oman, in Muscat, Oman, where the indirect talks were taking place. So the Iranian diplomats were just like, what's going on there? They were asking me for some kind of insight into this administration that they couldn't understand. And so they began to conceive a theory that what Trump was actually doing, just trying to create chaos to destabilize Iran's economy and to drive a wedge between the population of Iran and the government. Because that was happening. Like, I would see in real time how the currency would fluctuate with each statement Trump made. A friend of mine and Anya's said to us, "Your hotel would have been cheaper tonight if if these negotiations weren't taking place, because Trump had made some damaging statement which weakened the Iranian rial." By the way, I paid our own way there, in case anyone's wondering, and didn't accept any compensation to be in Iran. So by participating in the economy, I actually got to see how nightmarish it can be for Iranians and how vulnerable they are during these negotiations. Most members of the Iranian public I spoke to had no hope for a deal, because they understand the U.S. as a country that's under the sway of Zionism and has this historic relationship with Iran, where they see Iran as like the ultimate evil. And why would anyone trust the U.S., and especially the Trump administration, after the 2015 JCPOA, which, as Iranian diplomats would say openly on the record to me, provided no sanctions relief, that did nothing for their economy, and then led them back into maximum pressure that culminated with the assassination of Major General Qasem Soleimani, which was deeply traumatic for Iranian society. So from my point of view, after being there, having this kind of access, the prospect is bleak for a durable deal with the US, and Iran is prepared for that. They're prepared because they have survived maximum pressure. Their economy is battered and the population desperately wants sanctions relief, but it's a functional society, and they've been able to advance technologically and militarily under sanctions, which I can talk about. And then there's also this mentality, after 5 decades of the Islamic Republic kind of being under siege, of just fearlessness, that they've experienced war, they're not afraid of it. So it looks from my point of view, I would be surprised if there was a deal. And many people think that's a good thing because of the way the last deal went. The last deal was damaging in many ways to Iranian society. The principalist camp was critical of the reformist camp for seeking a deal, because they consider the reformists to be kind of a front for Iranian financial elites, and they think that they just want a deal in order to make themselves wealthier at the price of sacrificing Iranian sovereignty and weakening Iran's relationships with its allies in the region, the resistance axis. So there's that as well. But for sure, everywhere I went, I was interacting with people in the streets all the time, because it's very rare to see a visitor there now. Everyone was very clear with me that they wished that the sanctions would go away. I published a video of myself in Isfahan, which is probably the most beautiful city I've ever visited. It's incredible. It's like Venice, but more ancient, without tourists. And there's a water issue in the central plateau of Iran, and a lot of water has been diverted from the main river in Isfahan to farms and industrial needs. And when I was there, they opened up the dam, the river came through, and everyone came out to enjoy the river. And the bridges of the river have these kind of caves under them. They're ancient bridges, and in these kind of underneath the bridges, people gather and sing because the acoustics are perfect for singing. And I was filming, like, with my phone, a singer and about 150 people standing around, and he pulls me in because he sees that I'm a foreigner, then learns that I'm an American. He sings a song for me, and it's like a sing along, and everyone's singing. And at the end, he says, "We wish here's hoping for an end to the sanctions. He just says it and everyone starts cheering. So, I mean, there you have it. The sanctions are so painful for people and they've distorted their economy. And you talk to middle class people, they just can't buy new things. They can't, a young couple can't get a new car, but they work so hard. And it's because of the inflation brought on through US financial terrorism. So that's the main issue. That is like the main issue in Iran right now. And, they would love for a deal to relieve them of those sanctions, but I don't think it's coming.
And that's the playbook. We've seen this for so long now. The US uses its financial power, its control of the global financial system to make entire populations suffer. And from the point of view of like a hegemon, it's such a brilliant exercise of state power because you don't have to send troops to a foreign land to keep them subjugated. You just have to do some paperwork, and you can cut off entire populations from the basics that they need to survive. We just saw that now in Syria, where Trump just lifted the sanctions on Syria because, as he said, they were brutal and crippling. But he said they served an important function. He didn't define what that function was, but we all know what it was. It was regime change. Make a country collapse until it submits and overthrows the government that the U.S. wants gone, because that government is is outside the control of U.S. hegemony. So that's the playbook right now in Iran, and you get access on the ground by going there to how it works, and the people who aren't involved in policy and just want to live normal lives, all they can see is what's making their lives impossible. And they're not, obviously at the top of their mind is not geopolitical considerations about standing up to U.S. hegemony. They just want to have comfortable, decent lives. And this is the playbook the U.S. can deploy every time because they have so much power through their control of the global economy.
They have a lot of power to wreck people's lives, but they do not have the power to, what I determined, and could be proven wrong, they do not have the power to break the Islamic Republic. This is a very talented, highly educated society. It has a lot to draw on. It has an enormous production base. Its manufacturing capacity is amazing. Iran has a robust car industry. They make their own cars. They also make their own ballistic missiles, which can reach Tel Aviv in 7 minutes, as I saw at the Iranian Aerospace Park. If you haven't seen my video from there about the development and advancement of Iran's ballistic missile, drone, Air Force, and space program, go take a look. It's like a public museum that I was able to get access to just by asking. And it really gives you insight into just the innovative capacity of a society that's under siege, that's under sanctions. No one helped them develop their ballistic missiles program. Only Hafez al-Assad Syria provided some support early on, but every other government refused to help Iran. I was given access. I was able to go on a tour with a group from the festival of academics, journalists, former lawmakers of the Tehran Nuclear Research Facility, which was an active civilian nuclear reactor in the middle of Tehran, which was originally developed with U.S. assistance through the Atoms for Peace program, first initiated, I think, by Eisenhower, then through assistance from, I think, Stanford University under the Shah. The Shah prioritized nuclear energy and also had some interest in a nuclear weapons program, because nuclear energy gives your country, if you're like a mid-level power like Iran with a highly talented, educated population and a large population, it gives you a competitive edge over your regional neighbors, and you're able to export that edge. And so even the Shah wanted this. And under the Islamic Republic, this research facility, as I learned, just touring like a museum that they have, and then engaging in a kind of question and answer session with the spokesman for the Iranian Atomic Energy Association, whose name is Behruz Kamovandi, veteran Iranian diplomat of 5 decades of service in the Iranian Foreign Service. They are very proud of what they've been able to achieve through nuclear enrichment. and it all relates to civilian applications, preventing mites from infesting agricultural products, treating medical devices, producing fluid for PET scans to detect cancer, producing over 200 anti-cancer drugs and other therapeutic products through a company called PARS, which is sanctioned by the United States. They've been able to develop fairly advanced medical treatments of cancer and other lethal diseases without any outside assistance, and they're mining all their uranium at home, and they're training tens of thousands of Iranians in nuclear technology. What they want to do is diversify their energy industry, because there have been 2-hour power blackouts, something Trump exploited in his speech in Riyadh to attack Iran. And so far, only the facility at Fordo supplies any energy, and it only accounts for 1% of what's on the Iranian grid. So they want to increase that. But there's another issue. They've lost so many nuclear scientists to Israeli assassinations, including the person they refer to him as the Oppenheimer of Iran, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was assassinated by a remote-controlled drone machine gun stationed by Israeli Mossad assets on a highway in Iran to attack his convoy back in 2020. Losing someone of that caliber and then giving up on the program that he developed, that you've made all these advances in, it means that he died in vain. It means that all these scientists have died in vain, and they're not going to allow that to take place. So it's an absolute red line for Iran to maintain enrichment, and they are willing to abide. It was clear to me they were willing to abide by their obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Israel does not, but they're not going to stop enriching. And I don't believe that Israeli strikes can actually stop their nuclear program. It just doesn't seem likely or possible. And they will lead to regional, it will lead to some kind of regional war if Israel even attempted that.
And what about the demands on Iran that they stop supporting resistance groups to Israel? I mean, how much of that is a factor in these talks? And it's my understanding that basically that's also been a red line for Iran for a long time. I mean, that's why in the original Iran nuclear deal, it wasn't even mentioned, because Iran refused. Obviously, Iran's been pressured for a long time to basically give up on the acts of resistance. But for them, that's also been a long time red line.
It is a red line, as are the long-range ballistic missiles. Iran will not give them up. It means giving up deterrence and opening the door for regime change. They're not going to let it happen. But talking to Iranian diplomats, they told me that entering the negotiations with Trump in Oman, they were more pessimistic, and they soon realized the Trump administration wasn't placing these issues on the table. They were only focused on the nuclear issue. And that made them more optimistic. And Israel has tried to compel Trump to place ballistic missiles on the table and supporting Hezbollah, but they haven't done it, along with him pushing the Libya model. But you can clearly see why they won't do that. It relates to their strategic depth, deterrence, and touring the martyrs' cemeteries, as I did in Isfahan and Tehran. You can watch my video with Professor Mohammed Marandi, who lost so many of his friends during the 8 years long Iran-Iraq war, what's known in Iran as the War of Holy Defense. He took me to the graves of his friends he lost in very consequential battles like Karbala 5. That is another thing. I mean, it emphasizes the sacrifice they've made. And I would also happen upon or go to graves of IRGC commanders who had fought through those wars and were then tasked with supporting Iran's allies in Lebanon, like Hezbollah and were killed there. General Neil Forshan, for example, was with Hassan Nasrallah when he was killed. I visited his grave in Isfahan, and there were like pilgrims. People would come up and start watering the flowers on his grave, just random people, and say prayers for him. These are like, I don't want to say sacred figures, but very revered figures in Iran. And they're seen as defending their homeland by supporting these allies. So they're never going to give that up. If they do, it will mean regime change is already taken place, or is about to take place. And on another kind of related issue, regime change issue, I don't think there's a color. I don't see a color revolution taking place anytime soon. The Masa Amini Women Life Freedom color revolution attempt failed to dislodge the Islamic Republic, and it turned very violent. And this is not acknowledged in Western media. It was a very traumatic event for Iranians. Over 50 police officers were killed. Many Basij members were killed. There was one incident where a young man stabbed 3 of them to death. The Basij were mostly unarmed. Basij are like young people who volunteer to maintain the revolutionary spirit and to kind of stand guard. I actually met 2 Basij members who were like just young guys who, one of them was carrying a motorcycle helmet. They were wearing short sleeve shirts. They looked like, any other guys. They were very friendly and weren't like, they were motivated more by the ideological cause, and they didn't seem like, street militants or militia members. But anyway, that took place. It was very painful for Iranian society. And one of the outcomes that I saw, which was surprising to me, and I think would be surprising to any Westerner who has absorbed so much propaganda, is how so many women no longer wear the headscarf in public. And it's not really enforced. It's not vigorously enforced. Anya would have to wear it for if there was a panel or something official, you're walking through a hotel. It's but you basically, women just keep it around their neck, and you see them out in the streets in Tehran not wearing it. I saw the same thing in Isfahan, which is, maybe not as liberal of a place as North Tehran. And the state seems to have kind of relaxed their enforcement because they are denying a card that the West can put on the table to inspire a color revolution. They don't want to deal with it. And they also have pushed back on organic grassroots protests demanding that the headscarf be enforced by pro-revolutionary, more religious elements, and said, let us handle it. This is an issue for us, the government or the state, to handle, not for you to handle, because they want to reduce tension between the secular segment of the public and the religious segment of the public. And both are very large. I mean, there's a large segment of the Iranian public that is secular, middle class, supports the reformist elements. And there's a segment that's religious and is deeply dedicated to the revolution. And the West clearly wants to exploit or create any friction it can between those elements. Something I noticed, that I was told is more frequent now is younger people who are secular and religious congregating together and having friendships in ways they didn't in the past, which, is encouraging to see. And major fulcrum point between secular and religious is the issue of Palestine, which is sort of tragic. Because you see in our own society, if you go to a protest, Palestine solidarity protest, you'll see religious Muslims there, maybe even some Neturei Karta, like Orthodox Jews, and then lots of secular Marxist-minded kinds of people. So it kind of brings them together. But on one of my last nights in Tehran, I went to a cafe called Palestine Cafe. And it's made to look like the cafes in Bethlehem and Ramallah, with the kind of, white rocks on the walls. There are are keys in the main salon signifying, Palestinian displacement, and then photographs in the basement salon of one wall is like the secular heroes of Palestine, like Edward Said, Ahed Tamimi, and a lot of the great intellectuals. And then on another wall are the Islamist resistance figures, Hania, Khader Adnan, but you look at the clientele, and in many cafes in Tehran, you'll see a lot of women not wearing the headscarf, but there, most women were wearing headscarves. And I was told that the people who come to Palestine Cafe tend to be more religious, more supportive of the Islamic Republic, because the middle-class secular public doesn't trust anything that the Islamic Republic's leadership says. And so when they say that Palestinians are oppressed and we need to support them, including militarily, they will reflexively reject that just because their leadership says that. And so they're not as supportive of Palestine. And anywhere I went, I would ask people, what do you think about Palestine? And that kind of tended to be the pattern. The more secular people were, the less interested they were. And some of them would say, I'm an Iranian nationalist, but we should not be spending this money to support people who are far away, who don't have anything to do with us. It's like what we would say about Ukraine. A lot of that is the byproduct of the successful Western propaganda networks like BBC Persia and Iran International, which is run out of London but is funded by Saudi Arabia. The BBC Persia is the more sophisticated one, and they do tons of reporting on how much Iran is spending on the IRGC Quds force and how much it's spending on Hamas and so on. And then, they have problems at home, the health sector, the education sector is underfunded. So they're trying to drive that wedge. And to some extent, it's succeeding.
Well, yeah, and that's also, I think, a byproduct of the sanctions and all the isolation that Iran has faced over the years because of its stance against Israel. Like, for that, they've been made to pay a price, and the price is primarily borne by the population. And so, again, in that situation, ordinary people are going to wonder, why they're involved in this conflict that feels far away to them.
Yeah. Question, what was the country's infrastructure like? Very good. Better than I expected. The roads were very good that I drove on. The Tehran was meticulously clean. The air quality was horrible, and we all developed kind of like respiratory infections by the end. In the winter, I was told, like, sometimes school is closed because the air quality is so poor, but the streets are spotless. Traffic is horrible. Obviously, the highway system probably needs to be expanded. I took the Tehran metro from the north all the way to the last stop in the south, which is where I met Professor Morandi at the Behesht Ezara Martyrs Cemetery. So I got to see, what the subway was like during rush hour. It's pretty crowded. People complain about it being too crowded, but it was spotless. It was completely clean, safe. They don't get enough cars online because of sanctions. Like, it's hard to repair the cars, and so they could be running more cars, but there is a functional subway system. The roads were pretty good, very crowded. Someone's asking about the relationship with Russia and Turkey. Can't go into that too much, except that my sense was that Iran trusts China much more than Russia, and the relationship with China is very strong. All the construction equipment that's active in Iran that you would see building anything comes from China. Chinese cars are being retailed. If you go to any shopping mall in Iran, I even went to a rest stop on the way to Isfahan in the middle of the desert, and there were new Chinese electric vehicles and luxury cars on display there. You see them everywhere. So Chinese cars are like the new top of the line. Most cars on the road are French Peugeots. And technological cooperation with China is at an unprecedented scale. I think Iran is being forced to recognize that BRICS is the future when I was there, it was the first anniversary of the death of Ibrahim Raisi, the president who brought Iran into BRICS, and is remembered very fondly for that. He's remembered especially fondly by the working class of Iran. And there's still, by the way, a pretty strong debate on whether he died in a helicopter crash as a result of an accident or whether it was some kind of assassination, along with the then foreign minister, who is known as the foreign minister of resistance because of his strong relationship with Hezbollah, Ansarullah, and Hamas. But that was one of his signal achievements, was BRICS. And yeah, the Belt and Road Network goes through Bandar Abbas port, and there are all sorts of new highways and infrastructure facilities being built that you can see in Iran. So Iran is a key artery of the Belt and Road Network. How was the support of government in IR? Like, how many people supported the government? I can't really speak to that. What I can say is that everybody had a different opinion that I spoke to, including people who worked for the government, and that people were not afraid to tell me how they felt about the government, to the point where I would meet people in the street who would openly spout Israeli propaganda and call for the Shah to return. And they were not afraid to say that in the street. I kind of assumed they were in the minority, but everyone has a different opinion. There's massive criticism of the government. What you won't hear with people anywhere within the pro-government spectrum, including like anyone even in the reformist camp, is criticism of the leader. There tends to, what I sensed was more support for the leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, than the elected government. And then, with the different, governmental camps, the reformist and principlist camp, between them, there's just like the same level of antagonism and acrimony that you get between the Democrats and Republicans in the US. Many people were more supportive of the revolution, likened the reformists to the Democrats. The situation of Iranian Jews, I got to meet with a few Jewish communal leaders, and their situation is fine. They're doing well. Many of them are wealthy and doing well in Iran's political system and economy. They seemed comfortable. They're in some ways more protected than Jews in other countries. They have after the Iranian Revolution, they were given constitutional protections for the first time. But the main issue is that, not the main issue, but one issue that I guess comes from the outside, is that most Iranian Jews outside Iran are Zionist. And you saw like the fanaticism, Aaron, of Iranian Jews in Westwood when they were attacking protesters at UCLA. Like, they were the ones wielding pipes attacking them. In Israel, there's like 200,000 of them. They tend to vote for the right wing there. And what they'll say is that the Iranian Jews inside Iran are compelled to make anti-Zionist statements and anti-Israel statements in order to protect themselves. And, I talked to them, engaged with them about that. And some of them seem very sincere in their anti-Zionism. I think it has to do with just being in a different kind of media environment and seeing the situation in Palestine from a different angle. But there may have been also, an element of insincerity. And one communal leader said, yeah, there are differing opinions among us on Zionism. The main thing is they're the second largest Jewish community in the Middle East outside of Israel. They've been able to hold on, unlike Jewish communities that were destroyed thanks to the foundation of Israel or basically dissolved in the Arab countries. And they're doing fine, and they're walking around openly wearing kippahs. There are Jewish symbols on their synagogues, and They're not being vandalized. They're not being attacked in the street. I identified openly as Jewish there, told people without any hesitation that I was Jewish, and never encountered any hostility to that at all. So I think they have been misjudged very badly, but the situation of Jews is more complicated than I was going to be able to understand without like living among them. It's still amazing that they're able to hold on there. And and it was inspiring to be with them, and they're operating with a completely different perspective than Jews in the West are, where like, we're supposed to just be filled with anxiety every day about our position here in the US and on guard constantly for anti-Semitism. That's not the way that they're functioning inside Iran, inside an Islamic Republic at this point. Do most Iranian citizens recognize how the US is trying to stir up discontent and fan the flames of war? Yeah, I can't say I can't quantify public opinion. There is an Iranian pollster named Ibrahim Mohseni who has done some incredible work on Iranian public opinion with the University of Maryland. And look up any poll he's done for answers. And I'm actually planning to interview him later this week to get answers to those questions. What I would say was that I did get to interact with a fairly broad cross-section of the Iranian public, and those who are more secular and more middle class and younger, especially younger, do not seem as concerned about the effect that regime change could have. They only know life under the Islamic Republic and don't know what an alternative would be. And, it's something I saw in Venezuela as well. Young people growing up under sanctions, addicted to social media, seeing what's happening in the West. They want access to that, and they can't imagine that things could possibly get any worse. And so a lot of young people in Venezuela have turned away from Chavismo, but I would tell them that for sure life will be not what you expect with regime change. And with Iran, I mean, just one of the people who had political education that I spoke to, whether they were secular or religious, those with more political education valued Iran's independence and understood that the independence came post 1979. So really, it was a question of political education, and social media, as well as BBC Persia, which everyone watches on private satellite, has been a very effective mechanism at breaking down revolutionary political education and enticing people into believing that regime change will lead to some kind of paradise of personal and political freedom. I think the issue that Iran faces also, one of the same issues that Russia could face, is balkanization if regime change takes place. And balkanization leads to civil conflict, civil war. And that's something that I think those who understand the stakes of regime change are very worried about, or would be worried about.
Well, I don't see how you achieve regime change in Iran without invading it with ground forces. The sanctions, obviously, as you've talked about, have caused a lot of suffering, but will that lead to widespread collapse in Iran? It doesn't seem like it would to me. And so, how do you impose the conditions for regime change in Iran without sending in U.S. troops, which I just don't think is going to happen?
No, it's not. It would require more troops than the U.S. currently has.
Yeah.
And at least 20% of the Iranian public is just hardcore, existentially in support of the Islamic Revolution. And that's a large number of people. And there isn't the same amount who are willing to die to topple the government.
Yeah.
And I think, the more the U.S. relaxes the strangulation siege of Iran, the more the public liberalizes, but also Iran becomes stronger as a society and the government achieves more, the Islamic Republic achieves more validation because it's able to provide more to the public. And that's something the US can't allow to have happen. They can't allow the power of a good example to take root, especially in the middle of Eurasia. So the future for Iran, clearly, from my point of view, was BRICS. And also, I had some conversations with people working in the private sector who believe that they are developing the more sophisticated modalities for evading and or for avoiding sanctions and doing trade with countries outside of the SWIFT system, which is basically US financial hegemony. That the government actually isn't finding these solutions. It's coming from the private sector because the private sector simply has to. So, really, it's like a matter of time, I think, before we see the demise of US financial hegemony or financial terrorism, whether or not they make a deal.
It's just amazing how everyone has just come to accept that the US is this global dictator that can, basically decide whether economies can function or not simply with a stroke of a pen because of its control of the financial system. And no one, or, at least in our political system, no one challenges sanctions. The only reason they challenge sanctions is if they work or not, the
Yeah,
efficacy,
yeah.
not whether or not they're legitimate to begin with, but they're a form of extreme authoritarian control. Like nobody in Iran or Syria votes for whether or not Treasury Department officials in Washington can control the price of the food they eat, but yet that's the power that the US gives to itself, and we're all supposed to treat that as if it's normal.
Yeah. And that it's an effective tool for bringing Iran to the table. Like the Democrats would always say, the sanctions worked. It got us to JCPOA, but it's not going to work again. And the world has changed and it's just going to continue to change. You just cannot stop history. And a country like Iran that has just so many talented, educated young people is going to find a way.
Yeah,
And
and it's
I
so
mean, I
big.
could see it.
Yeah, and it's also so big. It's such a massive country with such a, a very well-developed and ancient civilization. It's not like, you know, um, a tiny country that the US can just strangle into submission. In Syria too, it wasn't just sanctions. It also took a 10-year dirty war that left so much of the country in ruins. So the idea that like regime change can happen in Iran just through sanctions, um, it's insane. But yet, and of course, the U.S. has no right to pursue it to begin with. But yet, it's all they can cling to. And unfortunately, I mean, the signals that you picked up in speaking to those diplomats in Iran is that a deal is not in the is not on offer when it comes to Trump, and that's just it's too bad.
Yeah, I mean, as an American, I guess I would want a deal, and no one wants to see war, but it might actually be for the better to not have a deal, and it will leave the U.S. in the dust ultimately, with some suffering from Iran. I mean, well-connected people I spoke to expect a summer of confrontation in which Israel will engage in sabotage, violent acts, and seek to draw Iran into this escalation ladder, up the escalation ladder, because Israel has escalation dominance. It does, but it doesn't mean that Iran cannot deter. Um, the main thing about how Iranian diplomats see Trump is, as I said, they tried to impute some rational motives to Trump, but the reality that they might not be able to understand is that Trump and his team are just so daft and so clueless that they have no idea. They might just actually not know what they're doing at all.
Yeah, I mean, like the fact that Steve Witkoff has three different portfolios: Iran, Gaza, Israel, and Russia, Ukraine. It's just like, who's ever heard of this before? First of all, he doesn't even have really a formal title. He's just an envoy, but yet he's supposed to somehow manage these three global crises and reach deals. I mean, no wonder nothing's happening on any of these fronts, including in Ukraine. Because how do you possibly give this much authority to one person who doesn't even have like a big staff. I mean, these are complex negotiations that I mean, if they were serious, they would be complex. But how can one person with a small staff possibly manage all three of these crises? And it's like, on the one hand, it's encouraging that Marco Rubio is not involved in any of them. Like that's a positive step. I'm glad, because he's just a career neocon warmonger. But how is Steve Witkoff, no matter what his own intentions are, managed to accomplish anything, given how much responsibility he has in all three of these different crises?
Well, one of the things that concerned the diplomats I spoke to was that Rubio is getting involved and that there's this power struggle between him and Witkoff. Rubio feels like he's been reduced to a peripheral role in the administration. Who is this Witkoff guy? He was never an appointee,
Yeah.
never confirmed, doesn't have like this long career in the Senate. And that Rubio has begun making statements as a negotiator. And so they don't even know who to listen to. And they are concerned about Rubio also because he is the creation of the neoconservative movement and has been deeply hostile to Iran throughout his whole career. But like with Witkoff, it's like, who is this guy? Like, we don't even know who he is. He was a real estate lawyer who was Trump's golfing buddy. And I think it's time to call bullshit on Steve Witkoff.
Yeah.
Like, I see all these alternative commentators praising him. Geopolitical commentators are saying like, he's a breath of fresh air. I think enough is enough with Steve Witkoff. He's done enough damage. His negotiations with Russia have been a complete failure. He's misjudged or as Bush said, misunderestimated Vladimir Putin. And it's not coming back.
He's accomplished absolutely nothing. And by the way, also, Rubio is also sabotaging diplomacy with Venezuela. There was some recent agreement that Richard Grenell helped broker, and there was a promise that some sanctions would be lifted, and Richard Grenell secured that. And then Rubio intervened and got Trump to back off of reverse. And this is a very limited sanctions. This was about extending a Treasury Department license for Chevron to keep operating in Venezuela, and Rubio sabotaged that. So he's clashing with Richard Grenell on that front too.
Yeah, Grenell got Gusano'd. That's what you expect. And the diplomats told me that anytime they would issue some concrete proposal, it would take over a week for the U.S. to respond, and sometimes they just never would because Witkoff was too distracted. It's like one guy. I mean, I would be pretty distracted with that much on my agenda. So it's just the simplest explanation might be the truest one, which is that Team Trump has no idea what the hell they're doing.
I concur with that.
Which could lead anywhere. So I don't know. I'll have more insights on Iran as I for throughout the next streams and as it comes back into the news. But the one final thing I would say is it was just like an awesome country. Just take politics out of it. It's just an awesome country to visit. I mean, it really feels totally unique. Like spending a few days in Turkey after Iran illustrated to me how much Western corporate culture can bring a country's culture down, because you just feel it when you're back in Turkey. You see the ads for all the corporate brands. The monoculture seeps into even a unique ancient city like Istanbul. But in Iran, you don't have that. They'll take Western brands and filter it through their own culture and churn out something totally unique. They produce everything on their own, or almost everything. And the beauty of the country is astounding. Like if you're in Tehran and it's polluted, you can go up to Mount Tochal in like an hour and just be in a village having dinner, like sitting above like a kind of waterfall in the mountains. It's amazing. Isfahan, again, maybe the most beautiful city I've ever been to. The people are phenomenal. Everyone is so welcoming. And everywhere I went, people would ask where I'm from, and I said I'm from the USA, and there was no hostility at all. Everyone would emphasize. And actually, you go back to the standoff around the U.S. Embassy in 1979, you'll see signs that say like we hate the death to the U.S., but not its people. Like they would differentiate between the U.S. and the American people, even there. But in the streets, there was nothing but warmth and hospitality, and a desire to get past the enmity. And it really is the case. It's our leadership that's the problem. It's our leadership, our elite, the neocons. That's our enemy. Iran is not our enemy. And that is something that I just felt when I was there. And you would too if you were able to go. Unfortunately, because of all this hostility, it's tough to get a visa. But Aaron, I hope you'll get to go there and see it for yourself and draw your own conclusions.
I hope to as well. It's always enlightening when you get to visit countries on the other side of the gun, like these global South countries that are targeted by Western hegemony. It's always eye opening, and I'd love to see Iran one day.